So we're here today to advance the restoration of 650 acres of Yakima River floodplain habitat in an area with very high restoration potential. Our funding proposal includes a request for the acquisition, design, and implementation funding. But at the heart of all of this proposal is the acquisition of a 39-acre privately held RV park shown in the shown map, illustrated by the red outline. The question at the center of this grant application and presentation is, moving forward, will the RV park be a constraint or an opportunity when implementing this vision? Okay. Since 2015, we have purchased over 500 acres to complement existing land holdings in a critical reach. So I want to point out the map again, and everything that's shaded in green is land that is currently in public ownership. I also want to highlight all the land that is shown in a yellow outline. Those are recent acquisitions that have been implemented by Kittitas County along with our project partners, but we hold all of these in ownership. And it's specifically, they've been purchased specifically for the purposes of establishing a corridor of publicly held lands so that we can be implementing integrated floodplain management within this reach. And I will go into more details about what that means. I also want to point out the area that is outlined in purple, and that is our restoration design area that we'll be referencing in regard to the design component of this funding request. The proposal, and with that, sorry, I'm a little scattered. So all of this is done really to advance a steelhead recovery plan priority, specifically to address the concern that while the Yakima River contained extensive floodplains with multiple channels and large areas for spawning and rearing, roads, agricultural dikes, and development have constrained these floodplains. Again, I'm going to draw your attention to the map shown. This is a relative elevation model. And anything that's in blue is either at the elevation or below of surface water elevation. And then as you move from yellow to red gradation, you're getting in higher elevations above the water surface elevation. Really want to point out a few things. The complex network of side channel habitat in this area, and then I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, probably not, but there are areas adjacent to the river, adjacent to that pond complex, and those are the locations of the Hanson Pits levee, and then a downstream private berm. So these are two significant constraints in this area, along with further down, we have an old historic irrigation infrastructure headgate, and that blocks off a significant amount from the upstream end of side channel habitat. With that, I'm going to advance the slide, and Jess is going to provide an overview of the key elements of our proposal.
And Arden, we can see your mouse, so if you want to use that to show things, that works.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Hi, good morning. And yeah, again, I'm Jess Inwood with Western Rivers Conservancy, and I'm just going to walk through real briefly the main points of our proposal. So the first one is, as Arden mentioned, securing the 39-acre Yakima River RV park that you can see in red. And so that would be Western Rivers Conservancy acquiring the property and transferring it to Kittitas County. Then the next one, thanks. The next part of the proposal is to work with the Bureau of Reclamation on coming up with a preferred alternative for a large-scale restoration reconnection project, advancing the preferred alternative to 15% conceptual design, and preparing a restoration phasing plan. It would also complete preliminary design for phase 1 restoration. And we'll go into more detail on that. And thirdly, working with Mid-Columbia Fisheries, starting the riparian restoration. So working to restore 20 acres of riparian habitat, provide maintenance and stewardship for another 12 acres of recently restored riparian habitat, and providing some necessary pre-treatment weed control for another 15 acres of agricultural field to support a pilot cottonwood restoration effort. Thanks, Arden.
So before we get into more detail about those elements, I want to just ground everybody in terms of where the project location is and why it's important. So we're referring to our project area as the Ringer Restoration Area, and it's located within the Kittitas alluvial floodplain. This alluvial floodplain is one of the historic alluvial areas researched in depth by Stanford et al. Around 2002, and has long been recognized for its importance in salmonid productivity. The Kittitas floodplain is within the upper Yakima Basin, located within the Ellensburg vicinity. And then it's that broad area is shown in the map, circled in red. So the Ringer Restoration is the lower section of the Kittitas Reach, located just upstream of the Yakima Canyon. Our proposal implements several priority actions, including Upper Yakima Action 12, reduce confinement of the Upper Yakima River. Upper Yakima Action 13, protect and restore floodplain, riparian, and in-channel habitats in the Kittitas Reach. And basin-wide action number 12, improve recruitment of cottonwoods. I'll also note that this directly implements Surfboard Focus Project number 21, which speaks to doing dike setbacks or other projects that increase connectivity between the Yakima River and its floodplain and side channel habitat in this area. I also want to speak to a minute for what's really kind of defining the upstream and downstream extent of this restoration area. I'm thinking about this in two phases. One is very explicit to the design, and that is really bound on the upstream end. And actually, I think we'll advance the slide for this. So here we're showing the Hanson Pits and the Hanson Pits Levy. So that's defining the upstream extent of our activity, and the reason is the desired modification of this Hanson Pits levee. And then downstream there is a private berm that was implemented. And so the question is, if you modify those structures to get more floodplain engagement on the east bank, we kind of follow it down to our downstream edge, which essentially is the RV park, and that's where we're focusing our design efforts. We have a slightly broader footprint for our restoration activities because it's all defined in kind of this broader Yakima corridor plan suite of restoration activities. So then to look at the actual on the ground restoration, we extend just past that study reach, so that we're also picking up some lands that are owned by Kittitas County and managed for floodplain engagement. And I just want to point out, I have this historic photo that I stumbled upon. I wish I had a date, I don't, but it shows the upstream extent of this study area. We are looking east, and so towards the top of the photo, you can see the Hanson Pits levee, and we can see even under current conditions, even with those flood control structures in place, the degree of floodplain engagement that's possible within this area. I also just want to note that the RV park is located downstream and out of this photograph, unfortunately. Come on. Okay, so that brings us to the Yakima River Corridor Plan. This was a surfboard funded effort. It happened right in the infancy of the flood control zone district. Actually, the grant application slightly predated our formation, and it's really become our signature initiative, I would say. But we studied the Yakima River from the Jeffries Levee down to the Yakima Canyon. that was the map that was shown on the preceding slide. And really we were asking the question, what should we do? What should we be doing to both address the flood risk in this area and to improve salmon habitat in this area, with an emphasis on trying to do both at the same time, and really selecting this area for a few reasons. One is that it represents a really largely undeveloped, relatively speaking, section of the Yakima River. It was located immediately downstream of the Shockey restoration effort, and it is an area where the flood control zone district had been maintaining levees on both sides of the river. And really from this effort, I want to highlight the habitat limiting factors that it flagged. One is that we should really be prioritizing conserving, protecting, and restoring floodplain and off-channel habitat. And then the second is that restoring access to side channel and pond habitat was key, really noting that while this is a relatively pretty wild and active and dynamic section of the Yakima River, we still had these kind of historic infrastructure in place that was cutting off areas, and of particular concern, cutting off areas to highly productive channels with groundwater upwelling. This is something that we absolutely see on land that we currently hold. There's a floodplain creek affectionately known as Spring Creek. When I started talking to the Bureau of Land Management about their property holdings, they were referring to a different Spring Creek, and lo and behold, when I read the adjudication documents for water rights within this area, both of these distinct bodies were referred to as Spring Creek. So we absolutely have groundwater upwelling occurring in this area. The vision really is to promote reach scale restoration in this location. So right now we are working with the Bureau of Land Management. They're providing technical assistance to help us with some conceptual design planning. This is going to happen, frankly, with or without this grant source, because we need this to move forward. But really the question that we're looking at is Kittitas County has committed to not maintaining the Hanson Pits levee any longer. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but I can't, unfortunately. So again, Hanson Pits levee, it's that area in red that's shown just to the west of what's known as Hanson Pits. These are borrow pits that were for road construction, and they're currently failing. So they're deteriorating over time. There's a cell that's completely connected to the river now, shown. It's the most waterward cell of that pit complex. And then downstream of there is a private berm. So we know that we're not going to be maintaining those structures. The question then becomes, can we actively remove them? What does that look like, and what other opportunities exist in that reach? So a few things that are just really highlighted in this map is removing the levee and the private berm. I point out that head gate that I mentioned earlier. There's one location of Spring Creek, which I have mentioned, and then a number of gravel pits through this area. Really the idea is to come up with a strategy for determining what the priorities are for either altering all of these features, kind of building in habitat elements, but with the kind of broad objective of trying to use a light touch approach to remove impediments and to have high tolerance for stream migration within this area. Frankly, the river is doing it anyway, so it's really a matter of not fighting it anymore. Previously, there was discussion of a setback berm. The only setback berm that we are currently looking at has to do on the far east side of the map. You'll see that large pond that's actually in private ownership, and you can see that there's a high area that currently functions as a bit of a berm. We made a commitment when we acquired the adjoining property, which was owned by the Moore family, that the Moore sold us the adjoining property and retained that land. We made a commitment to them that we would actually modify their road, their driveway, which comes in and goes around the top end of that pond, that we would build that up to provide flood protection for their existing residents. So that's the only setback berm or levee that's currently envisioned in this effort. This shows kind of that same area from a different perspective, and it's really kind of what the current flood conditions look like. So as I'm both a floodplain manager and involved in habitat restoration, and really kind of view floods and habitat as two different sides of the same coin. And really just want to emphasize that we are working to manage flood risk as shown in this property, which is inundation risk, it's erosion and channel migration risk. And at the same time, really recognizing that those are important habitat forming processes. So on this map, you will see our target acquisition site. And then I'm also pointing out the adjacent properties, the general location that we've already secured. This is a photograph from the RV park real estate listing, and I thought it did a great job illustrating this broad alluvial floodplain that's located just upstream of the natural constriction you have at the top of the Yakima Canyon. And in Stanford, in his work, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Just got a note. So Stanford in his work really kind of identified that this was an area of prime groundwater upwelling. I think that this photo illustrates why that would be well, and that is what we're seeing on the ground in this location. Oh, thanks, Michael. Bear with me for just a moment as I try and advance the slide. Okay, here we go. So, and then a point I just really want to reiterate is Kittitas County has been taking the strategy of divesting from from our infrastructure in this location, recognizing that it was a losing battle for us, frankly, and that it was coming at both economic and ecological cost. So in this image, courtesy of Mid-Columbia Fisheries, this is from June of this year. You can see that field right in front of you. That is our Papineau property. This is a location where, as part of this grant, we are planning for about 16 acres of floodplain riparian restoration. But what I really want to emphasize is this is the first location where Kittitas County saw that we were fighting to maintain Ringer Loop Road, which cuts south right along the river and then makes a hard left to create a loop. We decided that we could no longer maintain that road. The county purchased the Papineau property behind it, and we have abandoned a section of that road. And so it's no longer a loop. We have our north and our south sections. This is our strategy for the Hanson Levy, which is a flood control zone district property, which is currently over many, many years experiencing erosion. And purchasing floodplain properties to support has been critical in terms of advancing that strategy. Next, I'm going to go through a series of comparisons, which show some analysis that we did back in 2020. So the question is not just what does it look like if the county no longer maintains those flood control zone structures and they fall apart, but what does it look like if we take proactive action to remove those structures given the floodplain interaction that would result from that. And so I'm going to show a series of 3 different flow events, and what the current condition is. That'll be shown on the left of your screen, and then what a modeled scenario which removed the levee and the private berm, what that does for floodplain interaction. And so I've used the same color ramp behind it where we show some relatively minor flooding with that kind of most lightest blue color. And then once you get into the purple and pink, showing some very significant flood depths. The first one is 4,000 CFS, and this is typical for summer high flows within this area. So normally under a normative flow condition, we experience 1,500 CFS in this reach during the summer, but given irrigation operations associated with the large reservoirs, we experience routinely 3,000 to 4,000 CFS from roughly June through August in this area. And you can see even at this annual flow level, we have increased floodplain engagement of the side channels just by removing those structures. That's not even looking at other opportunities for reestablishing connectivity to that side channel habitat, for example, associated with that headgate. The next one represents a 50% annual chance flood event or a 2-year flood. This is 10,300 CFS. And at these flood flows, we're showing significant floodplain engagement. I also wanted to point out that the flows that we were getting earlier this spring in June 2020 start to approach this magnitude of flood event. And the flooding that we were seeing under the existing condition really does represent what we were starting to see, with some minor changes earlier this spring. So it wasn't this bad, but we were seeing these same general patterns. These are the magnitude and frequency of flooding where if the county moves forward to remove the levee and the berm, we are seeing significant increase in flooding to the RV park. And this is where I'm concerned that remaining in private ownership will just represent a significant constraint as we move forward to take proactively restore this area. And then the third one I wanted to show you is a 10% annual chance event or a 10-year flood. And this is kind of where things start to shift a little bit, where the Hanson Pits levee is not providing really meaningful flood protection for the RV park. And it really emphasizes, even with a 10-year flood event, that this site is currently under flood risk. The whole thing, as you would expect, is within a 100-year flood event, and a portion of it has actually been designated as a floodway. Floodway is a high hazard area designated by FEMA, which under our current management regime, we really have to reserve that area, not allow development so that the 100-year flood event can be conveyed. There are a number of structures within this floodway. It includes a residential building and a number of associated outbuildings that are at current flood risk, and they were implemented before these rules took event, so they are legally there. As a floodplain manager and somebody who's interested in improving floodplain habitat for fisheries purposes, it's going to be a really lost opportunity if we're not able to both, if this stays in private ownership, frankly, becomes a constraint for habitat restoration purposes, and we continue to have considerable flood risk for this property. So I would say that the question isn't even, is this RV park going to be a constraint or an opportunity as we move forward? It's broader than that, and it's, are we going to take the opportunity to address this flood hazard as well? As part of our application package, we are including some early action stewardship items. This can broadly be lumped into 2 different categories. One has to do with building disposition, associated with the property that we just purchased, the Moore property. So again, we have an undated flood photo, I've illustrated the large buildings that are at flood risk and that are in our restoration area that we will be removing. That's kind of proposed as part of this application. What's not shown here is that since this photo was taken, there was another manufactured home that was also built within the flooded area, that photo, so we'll be taking care of all of that. It's not included as a stewardship item because it's associated with the acquisition that's proposed, but there are a number of buildings associated with the RV park, along with all of the RV infrastructure, which would also be removed as part of this project. And then we're getting a jump start on riparian and cottonwood restoration. And I wanted to just, again, show people the general location of those activities in the attached map. So really the focus of these restoration activities are getting started or continuing work on riparian restoration that's occurring on publicly, mostly Kittitas County owned land, with a portion that's also occurring on the adjacent Bureau of Land Management property. Want to touch on the fisheries benefit associated with this entire initiative, really with an emphasis, really kind of, I want to emphasize the importance for MCR steelhead, spring chinook, and coho. Restoration planning has really emphasized the need to restore and improve juvenile rearing habitat for these species within this area. There's a critical need to provide access to side channel habitat for the flow refugia that it provides, particularly during the summer months. But providing access to these side channel habitats also provides critical thermal refugia. This was both during the summertime, where we have the potential to have high stream temperatures, and that risk is only going to increase with climate change. It's also really critical in this area in the winter time, where Yakima River flows are artificially depressed for storage operations, and there's a real issue with icing in this location. So we have less water, cold temperatures, and the ice builds up, and so having access to these warmer at that time of year groundwater inputs can be really important. I also just wanted to emphasize too that there's absolutely the potential to support spawning habitat. This is a photo within the study reach that I came across of coho spawning. And actually I just floated this section of the river over the weekend, and I was really impressed with the amount of gravel sorting that we were seeing. And just as we again promote these processes that encourage channel migration and erosion, we're promoting those processes that provide both rearing habitat and spawning habitat. MCR steelhead, spring chinook, and coho are kind of the species that will benefit the most, but I do want to emphasize that the following species are also present within the restoration area, with bull trout and sockeye using it on a migratory basis. So the RV park acquisition is really central to our proposal, our grant request, and that's reflected in the budget. It's really the driving factor behind this proposal for a few reasons. One is the importance kind of moving forward with the restoration vision. The second one is frankly the difficulty of funding. So we have an opportunity here. The RV park was recently listed for sale, and it is an expensive acquisition, both because of the land and improvement value, but also because we do anticipate to have some high administrative costs associated with relocation and building disposition of all of the infrastructure on site. So this is an important project. It's an expensive project, and it's not an opportunity that I have a lot of confidence that we are going to have if we have to wait 2 years or 3 years or 4 years for funding, or try and piece the funding together. So that is the emphasis of our project, both in terms of the project cost that's shown, but also the specific request from this grant source. I do want to emphasize, though, that all of these activities are underway. They're all going on hand in hand, and it is, you know, they're all linked, and kind of what we do with one of these elements impacts kind of what happens with the other elements. With that, I'm going to shift back to Jess, and she's going to go over a few of the challenges associated with this project.
Yeah, thanks, Arden. Yeah, so a couple of the challenges that we have right now is, so as Arden mentioned, the property is currently for sale and it's listed for 2.89 million. And the one issue that we're looking at is, will the appraised value meet that amount that the sellers really want to see? So, so we're currently going to move forward with an appraisal and hope that we get a value that is something that is competitive. The property's been on the market for a number of months, but one challenge is that it's for sale and could get sold at any time. So our hope is to get this appraisal done as quick as possible and provide a competitive offer that they will be willing to consider. Another, if it's not at a value that meets their expectations, we're thinking of other ways that we'll be able to satisfy some of their other needs. So just working with them on all of the opportunities that might help us get to acquire the property. Let's see, another challenge is just not quite knowing the exact project costs yet. So the big one is once we get the appraisal done, and we're hoping for that to get completed around the end of October. So that'll help us identify, you know, what are more of the harder costs, but there are a lot of other opportunities for spending money, so shifting funds around shouldn't be too challenging. So that's kind of one way that we can overcome that, not knowing exactly what the costs are. We know that other things the money can get spent on other things, the project. Yeah, Arden, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I think a few things that's really helpful. Acquisitions are always challenging and have some uncertainty behind them. And some of these costs are really difficult to pinpoint early on in the process because there are some sensitivities around them. So that's something that Kittitas County learned when we were doing our Moore and Stewart acquisitions. We thought we had a very comfortable budget, and then our relocation and our cultural review costs ended up being quite high, especially the relocation. So we're learning that lesson, and that's reflected in the budget. And that's part of the reason our administrative costs are high, and it's to reflect some of that uncertainty. I would say that the other thing that I would just add is that if we do have savings, if costs happen to be lower than anticipated, we have included, as part of the application, I can make sure that I get the correct map uploaded. I think there was an issue, but we have identified some additional projects that we would go after for acquisition if we had cost savings, just kind of to help manage that risk. And these are all projects that are not central like the RV park is for moving forward, but it would be really beneficial to get those in public ownership, just so that there's just no question or concern. These are projects that are along the Yakima River corridor within the project area or stream adjacent, and are either currently already in cottonwood canopy or would be easily restored if not. Okay, a few community benefits to just touch on briefly. One is that the RV park is adjacent to Bureau of Land Management property, which currently has a public access challenge. BLM would actually like to build a bridge over off-channel habitat in order to access the land that you see here in this picture. And being able to acquire the RV park would very directly solve that public access issue and eliminate the need for that bridge and really kind of reduce just one more source of pressure for some floodplain infrastructure. And it also, securing it would also help facilitate implementation of a regional trail, which has been envisioned for this area, which is the City to Canyon Trail. I want to really emphasize that, you know, anything that we purchase, and especially of Salmon Recovery Funding Board, that the prime objective is to be restoring those lands for natural-based habitat forming processes, and to not be putting infrastructure in place that that is contrary to that goal. But there are opportunities through some more passive means and locating, you know, mode trails away from our migrating river to achieve both goals. And then also I wanted to make it clear so that everybody knows, and to also highlight it as a benefit. The properties that we have purchased with floodplains by design money, which are shown here, it's our Stewart and our Moore property. We have reserved a portion of those properties where agricultural uses that are flood compatible can occur within the future. What's not shown here is we have our Sprayfield property to the north. And so the management plan in that location is to reorient the Sprayfield so that a portion of that use occurs on the Stewart property within the agricultural area. And then we're restoring the area that is river adjacent for habitat purposes. Okay, and then kind of to wrap things up, this is a complex project with a lot of different facets, and I want to be clear about kind of the partners and the roles and the responsibilities. Kittitas County and Western Rivers Conservancy, we are the co-applicants, with Western Rivers Conservancy really taking the lead on the property acquisition as previously described by Jess. And they would convey it to Kittitas County. As part of the acquisition, Kittitas County would take the lead on project elements that we have a lot of experience in, given our acquisition of adjacent property. So that includes managing any relocation needs if we confirm that they exist. And then also, once we have title to the land, really taking responsibility of removing all development from the site. Our other partners are really key and critical to the other components of our proposal. I'll start with the Bureau of Reclamation. So as I previously mentioned, they are providing technical assistance to really help us out with conceptual level planning, 15% level design for the entire Ringer restoration reach. This is a big initiative. It was helpful for me to kind of have their engineers take a look at it and make that observation. And so we do, so part of the service that they will be providing to us is coming up with a phasing plan for implementing that vision. Through this funding source, we would then be committing to taking the priority phase 1 from that phasing plan project and bringing that forward through the preliminary design stage, meeting the surfboard requirements, and Kittitas County would take the lead and have that responsibility. Mid-Columbia Fisheries is responsible for all of the cottonwood planting and riparian planting that's proposed as part of this proposal. Kittitas County just continues to work on addressing the buildings, that are on our Moore property, and Bureau of Land Management they're gonna be actively engaged in any restoration design that we do, because the conceptual design phase includes their property, and a portion of the riparian restoration is occurring on their lands. And then that brings us to the end. So we thought we'd end with another image of the RV park, and we're ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Arden. So yeah, the last slide was just a good segue to one comment that Becca put up here that you probably saw, just about disclosing a potential conflict that NCF has been contracting with Kittitas County on re-veg work. So just highlight that since that was relevant to that last slide. Looks like you addressed the question about the administrative cost line, but if not, Becca, if that wasn't answered to your satisfaction, let us know. And then there's a question here. If acquired, would planning occur at the RV park, and would buildings be removed under this grant?
Good clarification. So as part of the grant funding, we are requesting funding to remove the buildings. We are not as part of this grant application requesting any funding for riparian planting on the RV park. Probably the biggest reason for that is just kind of timing and landowner sensitivities. It kind of complicates an already difficult discussion to be trying to identify those areas while you're negotiating the purchase. And then I think it would also, I think we probably have some high priority areas, that green grass field just adjacent to the side channel, for example, where it would make a lot of sense to do some riparian plantings, but we're not trying to kind of get to that level. We're not trying to include that in the application just because it complicates things, probably unnecessarily. And I don't have a lot of concerns about getting funding for that when the time is ripe.
Thank you.
Becca has a question that she wanted to ask.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. Can you quantify for us, and not necessarily right now on the fly, but because we need to kind of compare what the restoration potential is here with or without the acquisition, could you give us acres or other metrics of if we get this property or if we don't?
Yeah, I can try and do a rough, I'd have to caveat it, but we could take a look at what we think that would look like.
Yeah, thanks. I think that'd be helpful.
I think what's really difficult with that, it's really easy to maybe look at the opportunity on the RV park, but to really understand how you then constrain or kind of how it impacts what we do on the properties we've already acquired will just be, I'll have to make a judgment call. To be, I guess, as direct as possible is the county's already made a commitment to not maintaining that dike. I am concerned about kind of our political support for actively removing that infrastructure if there's concern that the RV park is going to be negatively impacted.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe this is a question that we can discuss among the reviewers too, but because these projects are big projects with a portion of the project being requested from Surfboard, that might be a question on both that we're reviewing, is how we look at those questions 1 and 2 under biological benefits. So let's table that until we're just us discussing.
A question from Jen O'Neill. Under the restoration supplement questions in the application, the response to will a licensed professional engineer design the project is no. Is that correct, as you mentioned the involvement of engineers?
So Elizabeth cleared this up, that it's part of the planting plan and it's sort of a confusing element in the application. Sorry for that question, I just was confused.
I'm glad you asked it. That's a good, yeah, so engineers absolutely will be involved in large scale restoration, but not any of the design for the riparian planting, which is proposed.
Looks like Danielle had a question.
I'd like to ask a question. Will the county remove that dike if the RV park is not acquired?
I think that there's some nuance there in terms of exactly what that looks like. So these impacts to the RV park are kind of recently known as part of our due diligence that we've been doing for removing the levy. So, I mean, I think we're going to be wrestling with that and justifying our decision over the next year. You know, is it possible to mitigate those impacts? I have a few ideas. But the other thing that I'm just concerned about, frankly, is that this site is already at a lot of flood risk. And, you know, sometimes there's the you break it. Well, sometimes you touch it, you broke it. So we're going to have to, I wish I had a more direct answer to your question, but I think that we'd have to look really critically at it during our conceptual design. And I would just, and it's going to be a constraint. That's kind of the bottom line. So what we do, what it looks like, the ways in which we try and mitigate any impacts will have to be design considerations if we're not able to acquire it.
Yeah, it just seems like it's pretty expensive if it's liable to flooding down the road anyway. You know, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, the property acquisition, that's, yeah. No, it would be cheaper to make an offer after a big flood. I just don't know when that'll be and what, you know, what we'll do in the meantime.
Thank you.
I guess the other thing I want to make crystal clear is the reason that, so we've gone after this property before and the owners were not interested in selling, but they currently have it on the market. They only have it on the market for an RV park listing, and so they are still attached to that vision. You know, the concern is that if it goes to a new owner, there will be more expensive, there will be more extensive development of it. So, and again, it'll be what I've really emphasized, a constraint as we move forward with the rest of this floodplain property.
So,
Arden, this is Nelson. I was just going to chime in a little bit. It seems to me, and this, I'm from the, we're on the outside looking in a little bit here, but having an active commercial entity going on you'll definitely have political blowback and concerns for any reduction in flood control out there. And what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of flood control to allow for meandering and side channels. So that's the issue here. That you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you know you're probably going to hear some political squawking because of it, so, which impedes the rest of it.
So if I could ask a couple questions, Arden. So first and foremost, you know, when I took a quick peek at this property, it looks like the house that is actually there is maybe a 1920s house, which would mean that it likely flooded during the 96 floods. Do you know the history of whether or not it has flooded before?
I don't specifically know if it flooded in the 96 flood. Yeah, there is, yeah, I don't know. Somebody else actually might know.
I don't know as well, but I think, Arden, you were just going to say that there is a unpermitted berm that was constructed around the house. But I think after that, I believe in 2007 maybe, that is now protecting it more from flooding. Probably built due to flooding in the past, my guess is.
Yeah, and then I guess my follow-up would be in terms of future development. I mean, ultimately that would fall to the county as to whether or not you were going to permit it. So it's not, I mean, it's not a given that that would occur, correct?
Well, so I want to be clear that I can raise concerns about expansion and development, and that decision ultimately rests with CDS. So I do anticipate with our new critical areas ordinance, they'd have to channel migration study, I think. So part of the issue we have is that this is already permitted under a conditional use permit. And so the RV park is allowed. And I do know that CDS has told a prospective buyer that expansion of the park is allowed under their existing permits. So that's information that was conveyed to a potential buyer before I was even aware that this was on the market.
Was there also a question about cost per acre compared to other acquisitions?
Yeah, I didn't want to take up too much time, but I was interested compared cost per acre. I recognize the other acquisitions you've done in the area did not have infrastructure with them, but could you give us an idea as to what those were?
This is quite a bit higher. I'd have to do the math real quick, but I can tell you that we've kind of paid so this is a 40-acre parcel, and we paid comparable amounts to acquire 160 and a 225-acre parcel. So it is high. The appraisal would have to justify that cost.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
And it looks like we had questions from both Jennifers. Did those get asked, or are you still?
Jennifer Nelson, you were first.
Okay. I understand we're still waiting on the appraisal, which it sounds like you expect to have by the end of October. I was curious if there's any willingness from the landowners to sign any agreements beforehand or once the appraisal's in hand. If you've had those discussions with them, it sort of sounds like they're pretty motivated at this point to get rid of it. So I'm just curious, what are our chances of the long game?
That's a great question. I want to know too. No, yeah, we've been working really closely with their realtor and had a lot of conversations. And at this point, just as the end of last week, decided that we're a ways apart right now on what we think might be the value of the property. And this is, without an appraisal or anything. And we just want to be really cautious on what we offer and what they want for it. As well as Arden mentioned, they're kind of tied to the property and interest in it being an RV park and kind of bringing them along to be open to other things happening with the property. So because of being a little bit, on separate ends, opposite ends right now, we decided to move forward without signing, a contract or an agreement with them, move forward with the appraisal, but with a kind of hopefully an expedited appraisal so that we can get that done and have a really firm number that we can offer them that we hope is competitive. So that's a long way of saying we don't have anything signed yet with them, but we're very in close conversations with them and hoping that it'll lead to something getting signed at the end of October, early November. Yeah.
And I'll
Nelson,
talk real quick because a lot of times we can get a good estimate of what land's worth in an area just by looking at comparable sales. And the challenge here is because you have this commercial entity, which is the RV park ongoing, with the ability to expand itself potentially. And you also have a home and then you have ag land. So it was really hard to just ferret out a number. So, and we didn't want to commit to anything that we then could not deliver. So that's why we're going ahead and getting an appraisal so we give them a firm offer. We had asked them just as, I don't want to betray too many confidences, but we said, hey, why don't just agree to the appraised value and we'll do it there. And they're reluctant to tie up their property for a period of time until we know how much we think it's worth. So that's why it's delayed.
I think I just want to emphasize a few things. I really want to express my gratitude to Western Rivers Conservancy. They are incurring some cost here. And I think it really reflects, their recognition of the importance of this. That, there are a few dynamics here. One is that the landowner is attached to seeing this use continue, although they don't want to be the ones doing it. And it's, you know, if we're successful in obtaining funding soon and we're able to come in and give them a lot of certainty about what their options are, it's, you know, move forward on this timeline with this purchase price and know that you'll have the funding, you know, comparing that to a much less certain option, which is, you know, you can hold out for a different purchaser and, you know, maybe they'd be willing to pay appraised value or maybe not. I really think that being able to come in with as certain of an offer as we can so that the landowner has just a very clear decision to make and it's not based on hypotheticals will set us up to have the most, to be most likely to successfully acquire this property. BLM was supposed to purchase this property in 1981. It's kind of, you know, and their policy changed, is my understanding, during acquisition, where they weren't able to acquire land with buildings on it anymore. And so that's why they subdivided and acquired the parcel next to it. It really strikes me what a lost opportunity that was in 1981. And I hope we don't kind of look back at this moment then, kind of in the future, and think, oh, what a lost opportunity. Why didn't we buy it when it was for sale? So.
Question from Alex about the landowner built berm between the river and the house being fairly substantial, and he was asking if that's included in the flood models.
No, you know, I'm super curious to see the 2019 LiDAR, which I've heard from DNR has been delivered to them. I was completely unaware of this berm until it came up during that drone flight. So the berm around the house is not included in the model. So the private berm on the Stewart property is included in the flood risk modeling that we've done. And removal of that berm is our modeled scenario, along with the Hanson Pits levee.
It's a fairly high 4 or 5 foot berm with a fair bit of rock in it. You know, I've walked the BLM side of it plenty, and it's significant.
Yeah, I think the house would have been flooding probably this June without it, or it would have been a lot wetter. And now that puts, frankly, me in an awkward position of knowing about it. We're gonna have to, if this is not successful, we're gonna have to figure out how to address it without being perceived as being retaliatory. It's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was wondering about clarifying the scope. I heard you mention that the BOR will be involved in the conceptual design. Will they be providing that? I just want to make sure that that's outside of the scope of this because they're doing it as kind. Is that true?
Have to, in order to get it, I mean, in order to get this project past the 5 million mark, we need to demonstrate that that work is occurring and the value for it. So I don't know if that addresses your question. So it ends up being part of the grant agreement, but
okay,
no funding.
Okay, got it.
This,
and then one
this
other...
is a funny case. Technically, the surfboard's not requiring match in the traditional sense, but the total project has to total $5,001 or more. So in effect, they're requiring match, but not calling it match. Most regions are sending their full amounts to single projects, which means that match amount's relatively little and hasn't been challenging. This project, because we're partially funding gap to gap because it got TI funding, is the only project on the list that has to document in the project agreement a commitment to spending an additional 1.4 million to meet that threshold. So there's been a lot of talk, especially because it's the only project going forward so far in the pot with this level, about how do we make sure that that's real and that's something that the county in this case can commit to and show that it's part of a larger project. So we've been working through that. Elizabeth has been absolutely awesome on that. And it is a unique thing about the way we're partially funding larger projects. And is the project what's in the agreement? Is it the larger phases as a part of? This is part of a $15 million project if you look at past, present, future phases, but we're under those constraints of showing an actual 5 million price tag to the current phase through that match that's not actually called match.
Got it. Got it. And then just one other scoping question. Is there any facilitation or outreach included under this grant?
Well, so we'll have to do that to get the work done. We're not requesting money to do that work. So as part of the that outreach and facilitation, it'll be really directed towards some technical stakeholders to help inform the restoration design.
Excellent. Thank you.
Danielle, I think I may have cut you off. I think we have time for maybe 1 to 2 more questions. I want to be sensitive to everybody's schedules and get you all out on time for lunch. But Danielle, did you have a question?
No, I think you got everything. I got to ask everything I was curious about.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's some comments from Elizabeth in the chat. I just wanted to reference for you, Arden and Jess and Nelson. So those mostly have to do with PRISM, so I won't restate those at this point. But yeah, let us know if you have any questions about that. Any final thoughts on this project before we move on to some quick wrap-up comments about next steps? From Becca, a question I'd like to see addressed for our review: stewardship, community acceptance of the loss of the RV park. And so, yeah, I can always convey that information back and forth between, sponsors and committee members as well.
And the best way to provide this information is attachments in PRISM. And the easiest thing to do is to send those to Elizabeth. So just like we were saying with the last project, if you have specific responses or updates, clearly identifying those as updates since this presentation in PRISM, I think is the best way for you to be able to post those somewhere and reviewers to find and know what those are.
Thanks. Well, Arden, Nelson, and Jess, I wanted to thank you for your presentation today and answering everybody's questions, and just let you know that I'm here to help and as you approach the next set of deadlines with this.
Great.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
opportunity. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.